Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen. You caught me. You caught me looking at some of my notes here. I hope everybody is doing well out there. And I know we are all saddened by the news we heard this past weekend. I'm George Moss, the host of the program called What's Going On? And we come on at 2 o'clock here at allpointstv.com. And we're here from 2 to 3. And I'm sure that you are, as we are here at the studio, sending our condolences over to the people of France who lost at the last count, and the numbers keep changing, but the last count that I had was 129 persons that were killed, and of course some were critically wounded, so the death toll is continuing to decline because those that were in critical condition are continuing, some of them are dying in the aftermath of being taken to the hospital. But 129 persons was the last count that I had of those that had been killed in this carnage this past weekend. 352 persons were wounded, and 90 of them were critically injured. Of those 352 persons that were wounded, this was carnage that a lot of people are saying they were surprised about. I don't know how anyone can claim that they are surprised by having Muslims in their country, and then they're surprised when these eruptions take place. And we've got to get some real honesty on the table, which I'm writing about. I wrote about in a two-part series on Facebook. We've got to start getting real clear about what it is we're dealing with. So this was, I read a lot of the reports. It was saying, we were stunned. World leaders were saying they were stunned at what happened in France, and to be stunned and then forget what? You had to forget that they had just had an uprising in France in January. You remember the Charlie Hebdo situation that was in France, where 17 persons lost their lives. Well, this was 10 times that amount. And you probably saw the reports that said that ISIS stated that they are going to continue to pound France, and that this is just the beginning point, and they're coming for the rest of the persons in the West as well. We got to get real here. And I was watching the debate this past weekend, this past Saturday, and they had the Democratic Party debate, and they couldn't even define what it was that we are dealing with. They wouldn't even define the problem. I mean, it's amazing. Martin O'Malley, I mean, this is really sickening. Martin O'Malley was trying to find some words that would, in fact, go around trying to define what it is we're dealing with. And he said that what we're dealing with is, get this one now, this is a new one. We're dealing with radical jihadists. So we're not dealing with Islam, we're dealing with radical jihadists. So what religion are we talking about with that group? Are there radical jihadists that are Buddhists? Are there radical, let's use their words, radical jihadists who are Methodists, Catholics? Let's go through all the religions. And we will come down to one group that is in fact committing this carnage that we're seeing, and we're seeing it all over the world. Wherever they are, we're seeing this carnage. And I think we need to stop playing games here.
I never heard of attacks done by, overzealous druids,
I don't hear the zealotry in the other groups.
I mean, yeah, you don't hear, you never seen where like you said, a Buddhist has gone insane. And
no, not global, not on the global scale.
No, they contain it maybe. I guess there's periodic violence, I guess, in Buddhist countries, but, it's basically, actually in Thailand, the violence they face is also at the hands of the Muslims. So,
well, what you have here are people that certainly there are some internecine conflicts that go on inside of countries, because that's always about land and power, and people always vying over those two things. I mean, power is allocated, and land is a quantity of resource no one is making any more of. So is a, I mean, this is economics. You fight over resources that are scarce. But you don't see anyone that is fighting wars globally so that their religion can become the dominant religion around the world, and there's only one group that's doing that. And when I see politicians, like I saw on the stage this past Saturday, and of course they were messing up my football games. That's the one thing I do watch in terms of sports outside of boxing. I watch the college team. I don't watch much in the pros. I watch the games in college because it's such a nice thing to see the competition without the commercial aspect. And it was messing with my football. Of course, I was happy to see that we came up with a 7-point victory, 48-41, at the U of M. So that was good. But I turned away from the football games to watch the debate. And I was very disheartened to see this milquetoast, weak-kneed inability and refusal to name the enemy. And I've never seen in history where you've been able to defeat an enemy that you, first of all, could even define who the enemy is. And as I said in my post, I said I'm a little sick and tired of people telling me about all the persons that are peaceful, who are practitioners of Islam, because they're not even about that. In fact, that's a stupid conversation. I'm not talking about the peaceful practitioner of Islam, and I'm not talking about the violent practitioner of Islam. That's when we get off track in terms of trying to specify what we're dealing with. I'm not going to get into a discussion about who's peaceful and who's not peaceful, because that's a non-conversation. And it's a non-starter for me, because I don't think that has any credence. The question is whether or not Islam is a violent religion. Regardless as to what the practitioners are doing. And certainly you can't say that all Muslims are out here flying planes into buildings or taking guns and going into places where people are not armed and they are defenseless, and going in there and shooting people one at a time. In this one place where the Eagles were, this group called the Eagles were performing, they just were simply doing what they did over here at this university, and just simply picking them off one at a time, and telling these other persons, if you move, they're gonna get killed anyway. And people, standing there waiting to get shot. And I think that was 80 of them right there that were killed, just mercilessly. And they're shooting of people in cold blood. All of them are unarmed because of France's nonsense about gun control. And they're controlling the guns in France, but they didn't control those guns. And you're never going to control the guns of the people that are going to be violating the law, because they don't follow the law. All gun laws do in terms of restricting arms is restricting arms from those who are the law-abiding. You never restrict guns of those who are not law-abiding, because they're not going to obey the law anyway. And so this idea you're going to restrict gun violence when the innocent people and people who are not violent are not going to use their guns except in defense. This is the kind of, I just get sick of politicians that just cannot put two sentences together and have truth in both sentences that in fact consecutive in the order in which those sentences are announced. If the first sentence is true, absolutely, and you can bet that the second sentence got something in it that needs to be changed and altered in order to make it true. Because they just, can we use this term? They speak with a forked tongue. Almost nothing that comes out of their mouth can be believed. And I'll talk about this in terms of Francois Hollande and what he's doing over there. Because he's copied, obviously, from George Bush in 2003, that was responding 2 years later to what had happened on 9/11 by doing what? Going looking for some folks in a cave so as to throw off of the fact that the person that bombed Paris this past Friday and the ones that flew those planes in those buildings took one plane down in the nosedive in Pennsylvania, flew one plane into the Pentagon in Washington, 2 planes hitting the buildings in New York. 19 hijackers, none of them came out of those places that went over there to bomb. Those persons were hit on this soil. They're right here in the United States. And Francois Hollande is doing the same thing. These politicians are really something when you really begin to look at what they do. See, anything that throws attention away from them, because they're not responsible. They never are responsible for anything that happens that goes haywire in those countries. It's always someone else. And so I agree that we have a problem with ISIS. That's an agreement I think we can all make, with the exception of this silly president we have, because he doesn't want because he's claiming right now that he doesn't have all the facts in. Now here's the group ISIS taking the credit for having, sent the, gave the command. More
Wait a minute. He's going to hold back on that. So holding judgment on that, but he jumps on board saying the cops overreacted in that incident with Daryl Gates. It's just like or Henry Louis Gates. What is it? Henry Louis Gates. They overreacted in this. They overreacted on that. They don't. And gun owners of this, gun owners of that, and and all these people out there who are considered terrorists in the United States because they follow believe in the Constitution. But he's going to withhold judgment on saying anything about the attacks in Paris because he doesn't have the facts in.
Yeah.
He's really, really, really cautious about that because he seems he doesn't want to offend his buddies, Well,
I'm going to read something here from the Constitution about this president in Article 3. And I just wanted to make sure I had that where I can find it right before we went on the air.
Mr. Moss, you believe in the Constitution. Those guys threw that away years ago.
They did.
And they'll pretend that they'll pull out a tattered up copy of one when they're speaking and put it on the podium. It's like, you should be familiar with it. You're finding all the places where you're just disregarding it. It's probably fun for them, the giggling. Look what we got away with because we got an unsuspecting public.
Oh, yeah, they actually think we're nuts for bringing the Constitution up. For us to even begin to say things about what the Constitution requires, we become a laughingstock in this country by the political leaders of the country that know that they've eviscerated this Constitution, and this document has been discarded. They don't follow this document. They laugh at us who are trying to call them to account because of it. But there's some news down the line that they're not going to be too much happy about, because there's some things going on under the surface that they had better become aware of, because people are coming after them. And we're going to do some of it in the election, and we're going to do some of it, and we're very close to it, I understand, in terms of this convention we're trying to convene.
What we got to do, though, you got to strike at the heart of where America's really at this point. And with this generation, you got to cut off their Xbox and PlayStation supply, okay? That's the only way they're going to wake up and take notice and put the blame on the politicians. Because otherwise, you're going to have horrific deeds, bloodshed, sending men to the meat grinders all over the world. They don't care. But if their video game, source is being, eliminated or, slowed, oh my God, they're going to go insane because they can't do anything but play video games.
Yeah, the American people are going to lose this experiment if they don't start caring. I watch these videos where they go out on the street and they ask these persons the most simple questions you can think of, and they don't have a clue about any of these things. They're simple things. Who's the vice president? And I'm not saying we got a chemist up there, but we only got one vice president. I can understand if you don't know the names of some of the members of Congress, because there are 535 members of the Congress. But if you don't know who the vice president is, and you only got one vice president, and you don't even know who the leaders of the country are, the ones in the executive office, those two persons in the executive branch that head the executive branch of government, if you don't know that, then this is lost. I mean, if we can't identify who we are fighting, and then we can't identify these things like who the vice president is, then this experiment is over. It's just a matter of time before it completely unravels at the seam. But if we don't, the framers knew that in order to maintain this republic, for that which is left of it, you had to have an informed citizenry. And without that, it's lost, because people that are in power look for those particular moments where they can actually go in and take the liberties from people, because that's what they're about. That's what politicians have always been about. And there'll never be a time when they're not about that, because what they're about is power. And I've been trying to write about that in terms of how those that are politicians in this country do not really differ that much from the politicians in other parts of the world. It's not our politicians that made a difference in how this country became great. They're not the ones that played a role in that. This country became great by holding them in place. And we did have some feathers that were placed upon the persons wielding power in the United States. And what happened was that we were able to keep them under wraps throughout pretty much the 19th century. You know, we had the Civil War, of course, during that time period, but pretty much in the latter part of the 19th century, when the technology began to take over, we were engaged in the Industrial Revolution at the very end of it, having started around 1830, the 1830s in England, and we were kind of like on the end result of that, and our engine began to crank up during the so-called Civil War, but certainly after it was over. And you had all these entrepreneurs, these industrialists coming in after the 1860s were over, and we started to crank up this engine. Because of the emphasis on laissez-faire, we'd be able to hold the politicians in check. And that's when the grandeur of the nation, the creativity of America was able to expand itself and express itself in terms of creating wealth unparalleled in the history of the world. The politicians didn't have anything to do with that. They were held in place by this viewpoint we had of laissez-faire economics, government hands off. And as long as they did that, and they did it up until 1901 to a great extent, but really it began to come unglued the seams in 1887, 1890. 1887 with the Interstate Commerce Clause that was passed, and 1890 with the Sherman Antitrust Act. And so the government comes in as the ones that have to save us from those who were the producers. Now, when that begins to happen, you have a real problem on your hand when those that produce nothing are saving us from those who are producing for the country. But the non-producers are the saviors. You have to be really from kindergarten school. You know, that book by Evan Sayet, The Kindergarten of Eden. You know, you say the Garden of Eden. Has a book out called The Kindergarten of Eden. You have to be from the Kindergarten of Eden to believe that the saviors are the ones that don't produce anything. That would never be the case. And the politicians would never be the saviors either, except when the country is under attack, in which they have to defend the country, because if they don't defend the country, they can't defend their own power. But inside the country, they will never be the saviors of the country. And nobody can show me any history of that, because I went back through it to look at it. I wanted to go back and see it. See, when I began to look at these politicians in these 9/11 situations and what we have over there in Paris and what we had in Paris in January when you had the Charlie Hebdo attack, I just watched them. Watched what they would do. All the leaders came out, went to Paris. Everybody was mourning and all of that. And then what are they going to do once they leave Paris? Went back to the same old. And that's what Francois Hollande did. You would have thought if they were serious, they would have stopped the traffic into France. One of those persons, there may have been more, but one of those 8 persons they now know that was involved in this carnage, and there were others that now saying it maybe was about 20 persons was involved in the planning of it, and we know 8 persons were involved in the actual shooting. But one of those persons was a recent arrival from Syria, and had come by way of Belgium into France. So he went around and came, Belgium, and then came in down from Belgium into France. And you would think then, if they really want to protect their country, given the fact you've been attacked in January, you would think then that there would be a signal that you don't want any persons coming in that mindset. Because it's not a matter of whether or not they have a violent, I mean, we're talking about vetting these people. You have to vet the religion. See, you can have people that come in, and they may well have a clean slate as far as what they've done in the past, but they are practitioners of the religion, and the religion is the problem. They couldn't say that this past Saturday. Yet, what else is it? Islam is not a peaceful religion. Islam is not a religion of peace. Islam is a religion of war. Can we just simply state the truth about what it is we're facing so we can begin to identify the problem? And by the way, when they were saying, all three of them, what they're competing, that was this guy. The more he opens his mouth up, the less respect I have for him. And that's this senator from Vermont, Bernard Sanders. I want to call him Bernie. Senator Bernard Sanders. And I think Donald Trump has a point in terms of Martin O'Malley, who had learned a soundbite and came out and talked about this guy, talking about Donald Trump, made some disparaging remarks, knowing he's playing to the choir, and didn't actually make any point. But I listened to him too, and then there came Hillary Clinton, and they were competing to seem to be saying something when they were not saying anything. Hillary Clinton was saying, and we're not at war with Islam, and we're not at war with all Muslims. Why are you talking about? Why are these politicians telling us things like that? And Martin O'Malley, as I said earlier, he tried to find a new way of defining the enemy away from the enemy and the claims that the enemy is making and the base of those claims. And he said that we're dealing with radical jihadists. So now you can be a jihadist and you're not radical. What is that? It is ultimately nonsense, because if you are a jihadist, and let's be honest here, all Muslims are jihadists. If they're not jihadists, they're not Muslims. It's just like I was saying before in one of the programs earlier. See, I understand what Islam is. I want to read something to you from the Constitution. This is a book that we were just saying a few minutes ago. It's been discarded, it's been eviscerated, it's been dismissed, canceled, nullified, anything else you want to say in terms of it not being recognized as the law of the land, because this document no longer applies. I mean, that's what Thomas Wood's talking about in his book called Who Killed the Constitution? You know who killed it? The politicians in Washington have killed it. And that includes all of them, because none of them are raising the question about what happened to the Constitution. The question about who killed the Constitution not being raised by any members of Congress. And the president certainly can't raise it, because he's the one that's continuing to dismiss it on a regular basis, getting ready right now to unilaterally close Gitmo. And today, to just show you how much of a outlaw group we have, and you would think that in the face of this carnage, we would want to put on our face that we're not intimidated. So I don't know how long ago it was when they began to talk about releasing five more persons You see, we seem to be dismissing, we seem to be cutting people loose in groups of 5. They give us 1, we give them 5. Which says what about how we tend to look at the equivalency between the people who are in our citizenship and the equivalency of those in the citizenship of other groups, the jihadists, for example, those countries where they're from. You would think that given that they had the bombing on Friday, whatever had been decided prior to that, in terms of releasing anyone to the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, that you would in fact not want to go through with it at a time where it would be seen as weakness. And what did this administration do? It went right through with it, which makes it appear that we are capitulating, and we are capitulating. I mean, there are certain signals they're sending out, and some of these signals, I'm sure of it in terms of Obama's case, that these signals are being sent out to demonstrate weakness. I'm convinced of that based upon a number of things that I have in terms of some of the files that I've gotten through certain sources of people sending me information, and I am absolutely convinced that this person took this oath in the Constitution. Let me read the inaugural oath the president must take, and then let you decide whether or not this oath is being fulfilled by the president, and also to see if you think that the president of the United States, I'm asking you this question, if you think the president of the United States took this oath with the idea that he would in fact follow it. And I'm going to also read Article 3 in terms of whether or not you think that this meets the test of treason that's explained in Article 2, Section 4. And I've said this many times on the air in terms of Article 2, Section 4, in terms of the reasons why you can impeach and remove a civil officeholder of the United States from power based upon the requirements of that language found in Article 2, Section 4. And that article says the president starts off with the president because he's the most powerful of all the officials in the federal government. So it starts off and says the president and the vice president. And then it says, and all civil officers of the United States, all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office upon impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. But the framers did not leave it to happenstance to decide which one came first, the chicken or the egg in this case. In other words, which one takes precedence and which one was a priority, which one were they most fearful of. Because they said in the very first part of the language that a president can be impeached and removed from office for treason. And when I get to Article 3, I'm going to read whether or not you think, read this so you can see whether or not you think that what we're saying reaches to that particular level. Because I think what we're doing here, quite frankly, is that we are dealing with treason of this president. But I'll let you, I'll report, and you decide. The president taking his inaugural oath. And before I give you that, let me go to Article 3, because I think that we want to see if when this oath was taken, we want to see if the president who took that oath. You see everybody's arguing with Ben Carson when Carson said that the inaugural oath would be taken. He had no problem with Muslims being in the office if they would take an inaugural oath and would take the oath and claim to follow the requirements in the oath of putting the Constitution first. And he said if they would do that, he would have no problem.
I'd like to know this, though. Is there I'm a person that believes if you say something, you should follow through on it. I believe in oaths. But let's face it, politicians are sociopaths. I mean, they hit that words on a paper that they utter mean nothing to them. I mean, Snyder's already proven that. So is the rest of the Republicans in Michigan. We voted something out. They shove it down our throats. They disregard our voice at every turn. So what good is saying any kind of oath of office? What does it mean to people who have no honor and don't have a potential for embarrassment? I don't understand the whole thing about the oaths. I don't, not in this current era. Because there's always like, well, what is what did Bill Clinton get off on saying all the time? What is or whatever, what does it mean? Define it. They just want to split hairs. That's all these people are interested in.
John, you're right. First of all, the profession itself is not honorable. And then when you import the additional thing that you are importing when a practitioner of Islam is involved, then you're adding to that. We know to take the oath of office, put the left hand on the Bible and raise the right hand. And anybody know that none of them that are swearing their fidelity to the Constitution are carrying it out. If that were the case, would not have the treaty that they just passed with Iran. And that's not even the tip of the iceberg. But that would not have passed because it was done in an unconstitutional manner. If you doubt that, you go read Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1. And you'll see that none of that which is listed and itemized in the Constitution was in fact followed in the way this agreement was passed through a backdoor approach. None of that was constitutional. The Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 is very clear about what ought to happen. And what ought to happen, according to that particular language, is that the president can make an agreement. It's with the Senate being involved in the process every step of the way, which increases the likelihood that if they are consulted and they are in fact being involved in the process when it comes before them for ratification, representing at that point the states when it was first of all ratified when the Constitution was ratified in 1788, then that means that because they were walking with the president and were in discussion with the president as he was in fact making the deal, they're probably going to ratify it because they're reporting to the states what's going on about what the president's doing because he's involved in them in it. But that's not what they did there. What they did was, in fact, have the president to unilaterally get involved in an agreement. And before they even took it to the Congress, the president had this deal in agreement with other nations around the world. It had been already signed into agreement and agreed with by the nations in the UN. Hadn't even taken it before the Congress. And when he took it before the Congress, didn't take it before the Senate only, he took it before the entire Congress. The idea that they'd have the House vote on it and have the Senate to vote on it. But that was too hard for them to handle because in the House, you have a majority of members in the House of Republicans, and you have a majority of members in the Senate that are Republicans. And so that's too hot to handle because how is that passing if it goes through the Senate? It's not even supposed to be in front of the House, but it goes before the Senate. How is that passing? And the Republicans control a majority of the members of the House. Well, they had to have cover for that. And the cover was that they threw out what was supposed to take place, and which was to bring it before the Senate, have an up and down vote on it, where it would take 2/3, not a simple majority here, takes 2/3 vote of the Senate to ratify it. And that process was too hot to handle because if that passed under that umbrella, constitutional umbrella, then it's very clear that the Republicans have sold out. And this idea you have a two-party system in this country, they could not sustain that. And what they ended up doing, quite frankly, is not even bringing it to a vote. Those politicians I'm talking about, they raised no objection about this being this being eviscerated, dismissed, discarded, disregarded, and thrown out. Let me read this right here to you, and then I'll ask you whether or not you think this is being followed. Not just by President Obama. I don't want anybody to think I'm just picking on him because none of them are following it. But here are the 35 words in the inaugural oath, where the president can either swear But if he has a religious objection, he can affirm. So let me read this, and this is Article 2. Before he enters on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And that's an oath of office that all federal office holders must take before they install in office. You probably noticed that Keith Ellison, who is the representative from Minnesota, took his oath of office on the Quran. Now, I'm not going to say he didn't mean it because his hand was on the Quran. I'm going to say he didn't mean it because he's a Muslim. Because we have to understand something here. If there is any person that puts the Constitution above the Quran and Sharia law, that person cannot even be a Muslim.
Well, another thing is too, though, people don't look at it this way, but you know, if you want to point out religion, so we can be more ecumenical in accusations, the Talmud actually says it's okay for a Jew, or you know, who follows the Talmud, to lie to non-Jewish people.
Yes.
So I mean, so you see, that's the reason why the founders wanted to get away from religious, establishing religion in the United States, because they realized that potential for corruption was inherent with that. So I mean, it's, you know, let's face it. And besides, I mean, if they have no, I mean, let's face it, they can always say, well, I didn't know what I was saying, or they can always say, go back on something. I mean, the oaths is nothing. I just think you got to constantly examine their actions and judge it by that. But oaths mean nothing to me. I just don't understand. See, that was written in an era when people had honor.
That's
they
right.
had some more sense of honor.
That's
anyway.
right. You're right. You're exactly right. When person's words were their bond, if they said they were going to do something, I mean, they said, for example, in 1788, they said that if they ratified the Constitution, they didn't have in it any liberties that were in fact nailed down and secured by the Bill of Rights. They said that if the Constitution was ratified, they would in fact later on do a Bill of Rights to make sure the people's liberties were protected. And when they ratified the Constitution in 1788, they worked on amending it so they would in fact carry out their word and keep their honor. And 3 years after the document had been ratified, they then added in 1791, they added the Bill of Rights. It started off with 20 different amendments. They nailed it down to 12, sent those to the states as proposals, and the states endorsed 10 of them. And that became the first 10 amendments, all ratified at the same time. And each one having liberties that it was protecting based upon the fear that central government would be too powerful and would take liberties away. But they honored their word. But what I want to talk about is this oath, and ask you the question of why you think that Obama has in fact eviscerated this document. I mean, absolutely. I mean, why would he? We never had the document that's been dismissed in its entirety like Obama has done. And what does that go back to? I think it goes back to what I said earlier about a Muslim cannot pledge fidelity to this document and mean it. They can say the words, because the Quran allows for them to tell untruths if it is to infidels, if it is designed to gain advantage for the furtherance of the tenets of Islam. I forget what surah that's in, but I definitely read it.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you ever tried to read this, I'm not just being nitpicky, but anybody who wants to read a book and sit down and, okay, the Bible's definitely got to have, you got to have a guide to that to really kind of have a good grasp of that. But at least there's like a kind of a story-like quality to it. There really isn't. It jumps around. The Quran is the most chaotic book I've ever tried to read. Well, that and Mary Baker Eddy's book, Health the Key, Science, the Keys of the Scriptures. That's one of those other bizarre books I try to read, too. Yeah. It just, I mean, it's after a while, it's like, you know, when they come out with the video, I might watch it. But, I mean, otherwise, it's like, okay, I'm lost in 2 paragraphs into it. So, but the Quran is like, they'll have a chapter heading, and then it might mention that somewhere there in this long scrambling thing, but it jumps around. So I mean, it's like you wonder why people can pull stuff out of it. Like I guess some people would say the Bible. You know, like you're saying, if you take it out the Bible out of context, at least you can say, well, yeah, the Israelites or whatever are told to murder these people or take their land. But okay, that doesn't mean it's a continuing action. Just to, it probably is now. But anyway, but. The Quran doesn't say this is against these particular people at this particular time. It sounds like it's always supposed to be carried out continuously. There's a big difference between even the Old Testament with the Jewish traditions and stuff, which I'm not part of. But at least you can recognize there's supposed to be a cutoff point. You don't see that in the Quran.
Yeah, it jumps around a lot because there are a lot of revelations of convenience. At the Battle of Uhud, when the men had gone into battle based upon the Muslim prophet sending them into battle, in which a lot of men were in fact killed, and they had women that had lost their husbands, and they were murmuring against the prophet. That night, there was a revelation, and the revelation was that a man could take more than one wife. And that would have calmed the waters so somewhat in terms of people having lost their husbands, and so a lot of it is that kind of a thing.
Well, then this is also says in the Quran though. If you read it, because a friend and I was just talking about that today. He's from the Middle East. He's from Lebanon, and he was telling me. He said, "No, if you read the Quran, it says that and it says that they can have up to 4 wives, but they got to give each woman equal attention." Well, how can you do that with 4 wives? How can you do that with anybody? You can't give equal attention to. I mean, that's just an impossibility. So it's kind of like a subtlety there, So he predicts that up, and he's because he's born and raised around Muslims. So, but he said he's not on board with Islam, from the Quran. He thinks it is also a disjointed book. But there's things like there's little asides you can take it as, or take it like in that one direction. So I mean, they give themselves ways out,
Yeah, and there are those who would say that because you cannot keep the equality tenet of the 4 wives, that therefore the Quran is calling for having one wife. And you can make an argument both ways. They're saying because of the bar being so high, that what was really intended was monogamy and not polygamy. But the prophet had more than one wife, so that's to copy his example. And some of them are copying his example in terms of marrying children at age of 9, because he married Aisha when she was 6. And at 9, once she started her puberty, then he consummated the marriage when she was 3 years later.
Could you imagine the honeydew list from 4 wives? Could you imagine that? Like, clean the gutters, or whatever the equivalent is. 4 wives giving you honeydew list. I mean, it's probably for the betterment of the guy to only stay with one woman.
That'll be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most person will agree that you have your work cut out for you, and I think women will agree also. They have their work. I mean, it's not like I'm talking about this from a gender standpoint. You talk about 2 persons becoming one. That's not possible. The person still has the male has his head, and the woman has her head, and so both of them have independent thought. And you got to bring that in some kind of congruency with each other. And that's not always easy if they're seeing the world and that particular event through different prisms and do not see it the same way. The question, how do you harmonize it? And this idea they become one is good. It's a good theory. but how it works in you have to work at that in terms of the application of it. And we know that not very many persons are good at it, because look in the divorce court and see that one-on-one is hard. You can imagine what it would be if it's four-on-one, going in either one of the two directions. And I've been in countries where there are these multiple marriages. I've been in countries where Christians have had more than one wife. In Nigeria, it was in Nigeria. I was in Benin, and that's a practice. So I mean, it's not a wide practice, because you don't have the economic means in order to even pretend you can take care of multiple families. But I've met and talked to and sit in the houses with in Christian homes where I didn't meet all the wives. I met one of the wives in the house where I was, but he had another wife, and another family. And this was a Christian in Benin, and I could tell it was not going too well for him, because he was struggling economically, and there was nothing in that house. I'm sure it was probably about the same amount of furniture in the other house, trying to do two houses, and then the salary is not that good. And that's a problem. And, you know what they say about finance. They say romance without finance is nonsense.
It's a good one. I never heard that, but I like that. That makes sense.
I mean, when finance goes out the window, love goes out the door. She's walking. She's going back to her mom.
Well, now who was Benin actually a colony of one of the European powers?
Yeah, it's also the British. You go there and has a British, all of that area around there. Benin, Nigeria, the Cameroon, all of that was British. If you talk about the French, it's in a different place. There's a very good book. I'm trying to think of it. Written by David Lewis. It's an excellent book where he talks about the competition coming down the Nile, and they are trying to reach the lands where they can claim this land before anyone else got there, and obtaining spheres of influence. So the French would get over here in this part, and over here they would have another country over there. Germany is being excluded pretty much at that time. Will have to fight its way into it later on, and I think that's why World War I breaks out. But they were, and you go to the map and see what they did. They went there. You see the countries that are pretty much drawn at angles, and you don't have countries carved out of straight lines, because boundaries are how you determine the boundaries of countries. So when you see straight lines in a country on a map, everyone they went there with a ruler and carved that out. No, so Cameroons and all those places were carved out.
Italy and Germany got into the colonial game pretty late in the game, didn't they?
They did, yeah. And because they were late, they were picking up the scrappings, and you see that happening with Italy in 1896, in this battle that occurred in Ethiopia, and that's a good book out there called Empress Tetu. It's called Menelik II and Empress Tetu. I think Empress Tetu's name comes first, because she was the one that really was the leader of the fight when Italy went into Ethiopia. Because that's over there on the Horn, and they didn't have anything going over there. Nobody wanted that. So they went over there as getting the leftovers, because all of the rest of it had been pretty much carved up, with the exception of Liberia, which is a sphere of influence of the United States, having come out of the American Colonization Society in 1817, and they had become a part of the decolonization that was going on by some of the persons over here going to Liberia and setting it up as a settlement under the American Colonization Society, headed by John Jay and some of the others. The point I'm making is just that this idea of multiple marriages, I've seen it in those countries that were in fact carved out, and some of them are Christian countries, and they have all kinds of people in those countries. Because when you carve it out, you're not carving it based upon natural indigenous boundaries where groups of kind of, there's one group over here and a group over there. What they're doing is drawing a boundary around them and carving it out based upon spheres of influence. And that's some of the problems that they have right now in Africa. A lot of ethnic groups in the same country that don't get along with each other. But I've seen where you have more than one wife, and I've seen how it works out. That's hard. And so there are some that are making the claim that, well, it calls for, say you can have as many as 4 wives, but really the application of it is such that it's probably a call in terms of the practicality, it's calling for 1 wife. So it's really, there's some that make a claim it's monogamous, some that is polygamous in terms of religious orientation and what it calls for in marriage. And you can argue it both ways, but it does. But if you follow the example of the prophet, 4 wives, because he had 4 wives. And some of them are marrying 9-year-old brides because he also did that. But I want you to tell me whether or not you think that Obama is following the Constitution. I think we can all agree that that's not what's happening. And then think about, why would he have been the first president we've had among all the other presidents that have eviscerated the Constitution to an extent? I mean, we've always had what we call an imperial president. We had that with John Adams. I mean, we talk about, I heard them talk about the imperial presidency with Richard Nixon. We've always had an imperial presidency. Starting with John Adams. John Adams was imperial president. What I mean by imperial president, those who go beyond the boundaries of what is around them, corralling their power in the constitutional strictures that say that you can do this much, but you can't do the other things. And the confinement of the president is in Article 2. There are restraints on that. And there are restraints on the president also by the Bill of Rights, which is all 10 of the amendments. All of that is prohibitive of certain things the president cannot do. But look at John Adams, who is in fact going outside those restraints. And I have some respect for Thomas Jefferson, but Thomas Jefferson annexed the Louisiana territory in 1803. I mean, I agree 4 cents an acre was a steal, but there's still a constitutional process that's explained in Article 2. In Article 1. In terms of how you annex land and territory in the United States. That's a congressional responsibility. And it's not anywhere found for the president to be able to initiate that by the powers that are delegated to the president in Article 2. Don't forget, the president's job is to enforce the law. If no law is in fact passed, you can't enforce it. I mean, even I understand that, and I'm not even the president. But if they're president, they swore to understand it. Otherwise, why are you swearing to it? So I assume they understand it and then dismissed it. But John Adams, it began to become unglued with John Adams, and then Thomas Jefferson did some things that were unconstitutional as well. And some of them, like Andrew Jackson, when this 34-year reigning Supreme Court Chief Justice, John Marshall, who was Chief Justice from 1801 to 1835, when he came in and he made some rulings that Andrew Jackson did not like about the Native Americans, Andrew Jackson stated that the court has made its decision, now let the court enforce it. And so that's a bit of a problem. I mean, sometimes we've had these really you only have revolution in the country when institutions get in conflict with each other. This idea that revolution is just people rising up and all of that, until there's a conflict really with the institutions of the institution of power, where the institutions are going to war with each other. That's when you have revolution. People can rise up. And maybe some other things will join into it, and the institution began to go to war because there's somebody inside of the institution that want power and couldn't get it under the other auspices of how it operates, and operate now through revolutionary fervor, and they gain power that way. And you look at whenever they had revolution, you always seen that some parts of the government comes unglued, and they then turn. In fact, I can say this also. What would happen in terms of what these dictators do in order to maintain power? They go in late at night And they announced, as they did with Saddam Hussein, the president has been overthrown. And they watch for anybody that's cheering. And they cut their heads off. Because they're trying to identify what the likelihood is of having somebody to revolt within the frame of government, because that's where the dangers are. And of course, there's some dangers out here with the people also. But the dangers out here get to meet the dangers that is inside. In other words, the plot that goes on out here, it better have some folks inside the government that are willing to join on to it, or your head is going to be cut off. You know, that's what happened to President to Jammeh. And I had just left there. There was a coup attempt with President, let me get his whole name now, Haji Yahya Jammeh. I left out a part. Your Excellency. Got to say that part first. And he left the country and went to visit. And I know there's a lot of discontentment in that country, because a lot of folks talk to me off record. And then they start looking around because there's so much paranoia. I've had people tell me, you know, there's some things that I would not discuss with them, because I knew that it puts them in jeopardy. And someone would tell me, I would invite them to maybe have dinner or lunch with me, and they would say, I'm not supposed to talk about that. And I feel bad about having brought it up, because I knew that to discuss that with people all over the place listening in, and there's a lot of spies that they have out there, because they understand that the people are upset, and that the people are looking for a chance to join into an uprising inside, and so they have to be on guard all the time. And so I would feel bad when I raised them and they felt uncomfortable about it, because I wasn't trying to put them on the spot, because I understand the inherent danger in that. But Jammeh had left the country. El Haji, Your Excellency, El Haji Yahya Jammeh. And some people rose up against him, and he's coming back now from, I think he might have been in France. I don't know exactly what country he was in. He was in Europe somewhere. And he started flying back in there to get a handle on this coup. And there were people inside of the military who knew that if there was any inkling these persons were in fact siding with the persons that were there, they were going to be in trouble. So they were saying in a very sycophantic, acquiescent way, "We are with you, Presidente," because they want to let him know that whoever was inside the government that was in fact bringing that to the forum, they were fighting to put this insurrection down. And that's how when he came back, he dismissed some folks. Some other people paid the ultimate, price for it, and things like that. Well, let me just read this as we go off the air with this particular program, because I think we have to look at what is going on here in our government as well as the government over in France, and all this misdirection that's taking place. In Article 3, you have we said Article 2, Section 4 gives impeachment and removal from office. It says here in Article 3, though, the trial of all crimes except in cases of impeachment, because impeachment goes on in the House and in the Senate. Otherwise, except in case of impeachment, the trial shall be by jury, and such trial shall be held in the state where the said crimes shall have been committed, but when not committed within any state, the trial shall be in such place or places as the Congress may by law have directed. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them and in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. No person shall be convicted of treason unless on the testimony of two witnesses. Do we have any witnesses that there's treason going on in this country? Two witnesses to the same overt act, or on confession on confession in open court. That's in Article 3. And ask yourself the question of whether or not when this president put his hand on the Bible, didn't take it, put it on the Quran, that's what Ellison did. Ask yourself that in either case, with the out in the open Muslim and in what I consider to be a hidden, undeclared Muslim, and I conclude that based on everything this man has done in office for 7 years, could that possibly explain why the first president we've had that eviscerated the document in its entirety, which had never happened before, could that be the reason why this has occurred? And I will say one thing before I get off the air in addition to what Carson said. You see, I'm not bothered by Ellison. I knew he was lying when he did that. I only had to know that he's a Muslim. I knew he was lying when he took the inaugural oath. But that does not bother me the way it would bother me for the president. And the reason for that is there are 535 members of Congress. And that would only bother me if they're putting their hands on the Bible or the Quran and they're swearing that oath, and it's majority of them in the House and in the Senate, through which they can in fact take that oath, do not mean it, and overthrow this document, because they would not mean it if they're Muslims. But you see, the problem with the president is we only have one president. And for those of you out there on the street don't know who he is, that's Barack Hussein Obama. And we got a problem on our hands. We have a situation on our hands. And they have one in France as well. Okay, keep looking at what's happening there in France. Hollande has declared Article 5, invoked Article 5. That means that he's declaring war in the name of NATO. And Article 5 means then that NATO is at war, therefore. Because any of his members that invoke Article 5, then all of the members are in that war. We'll see what Obama does. And I'll be very interested to see how he handles that. Okay, got to get out of here. Until next time, I want you to follow your dream. Because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.